This is the signature assignment. Defend your position on school choice. The scenario chosen was scenario 2. You are the superintendent of a school district. A charter school operator has submitted a proposal to open a charter school in your district. Create a video presentation to the state education department summarizing an argument against granting the school's charter. Where applicable, reference case law and current legislation from your state to support your argument. Historically, South Carolina has been very anti-school choice. Roughly 10 years ago, school choice advocates started campaigning for a voucher program, or a program that would offer scholarships to low-income students to attend the private school of their parents' choice. When the voucher program could not gain support, they moved on to an open enrollment, which would liberalize the state's zoning restrictions and encourage some level of competition among schools and districts. The idea was that families who were zoned for failing schools would be able to remove their kids from that system altogether. But this again failed to gain support. Time and time again, support has failed to be gained by advocates of the school choice movement due to funding. Many people believe that state funding should not be funneled away from public education and into the hands of private education. The workaround to the funding debate seems to come in the form of charter schools. Charter schools are funded by the state, yet they operate independently and are held to none of the standards of a public school. The South Carolina Public Charter School District was formed by legislation that was written in 1996. This legislation does not cap public charter school growth. It provides multiple authorizing options to charter school applicants and provides a fair amount of autonomy and accountability to charter schools. The state started out with 5 schools and 2,000 students. It has now grown to over 34 schools serving 20,000 students. Over the years, charter school advocates have fought for and been successful in convincing legislature to incrementally increase funding for charter schools in the SCPCSD. Since local money does not follow the child in South Carolina, the legislature appropriates additional dollars through an annual budget proviso to help with money disparity. That amount is currently $3,500 per pupil for brick and mortar schools and $1,900 for virtual schools. These per pupil allotments also apply to budget requests made by an IHE authorizing charter schools. That's money that is being diverted from public schools to charter schools, which are essentially publicly funded private schools. The issues with charter schools are numerous. First, most are not helping kids. Based on a report by Representative Roebuck for the 2012-2013 school year, the average school performance profile score for traditional public school was 77.1%, but for charter schools, it was 66.4%. Some are actually hurting kids. A study of charter schools in Pennsylvania stated that charter schools cover 29 fewer days of reading material on average and 50 days fewer of math than traditional public schools. Gordon Lafer, a political economist at the University of Oregon, reported that charters often offer a narrow curriculum focused on little more than reading and math test prep, inexperienced teachers with high turnover, and blended learning products designed to enrich charter school board members' investment portfolios. There are far too many cash cows. There are too many hedge fund managers and political campaign donors connected to charter schools, indicating that these schools might be serving to line the pockets of private companies and individuals, an issue that should not be involved in any type of education. There is a huge lack of transparency and accountability. Charter schools are publicly sponsored, but function as if they were private individuals. They do not have to release their salaries, unlike traditional schools. And in California, some charter school operators have argued in court that they are private entities and should not be treated as public institutions. They are closing traditional public schools. A New York Times article on the Walton Family Foundation reported that it gave $478,380 to a fund affiliated with the Chicago Public Schools to help officials conduct community meetings to discuss their plan to close more than 50 schools at a time when charter schools were expanding into the city. They have a lack of innovation. Charter schools claim to be a place to test out new educational ideas and then introduce them to traditional public schools. But this is not happening either. There is no evidence of this happening here in South Carolina. They drain resources from struggling districts. When students leave traditional schools for charter schools, the school building still has to have power and water, and the staff still needs to be paid. The students leave and take their funding, placing enormous strains on poorer districts. The charter school industry is also rife with fraud and corruption. The Washington Post reported that in Pennsylvania there were 8 charter school officials that pled guilty to federal fraud charges, which again goes back to their lack of transparency. There is no way to know how the money afforded to these schools by the state and local governments is being spent, and clearly that leaves room for lots of illegal activity. Charter schools contribute to the resegregation of education. The battle to desegregate schools was a long but worthy battle, especially here in the South. Charter schools pose a threat to what we worked so hard to end. A recent report warns the proliferation of charter schools risk increasing current levels of segregation based on race, ethnicity, and income. They claim they would like to be more diverse, but that it's too hard. Charter schools get to pick their curriculum and thus get to decide if they want to serve ELL, special education, and low socioeconomic status students. They get to pick their students, and that can only negatively impact the desegregation of schools. It is also incredibly difficult to get rid of a bad charter school. Over 50% of the charter schools that have been open for more than 10 years have SPP scores below 70, and yet they are not being closed as they should. Part of the accountability of a charter school is that if they fail to produce the standards they are held to, the state can close them. And over half are minimally proficient, and yet they remain open. Charter schools are guilty of skimming and using weed-out strategies. Dr. Kevin Wellner, a professor of education policy at the University of Colorado at Boulder, found that charter schools can shape their student enrollment in surprising ways. They use methods that often decrease the likelihood of students enrolling with a disfavored set of characteristics, such as students with special needs, those with low test scores, English learners, or students in poverty. Charters also promote choice as a solution. Charter schools use the word choice to garner support. If a public school is failing, then parents should have a choice not to send their students there. But that doesn't stop the failing school from failing those students that cannot gain access to the other options. Competition is healthy, but the opponents should have an equal opportunity at success. Taking funding away from public schools to fund these charter schools weakens the traditional system and leaves it unable to compete. We should focus on fixing the problems that cause parents to want to leave public education, not making them worse. This is the state and local funding for the 2019-2020 school year in Cherokee County. This funding from the local and state government is very specific. Every penny is used to operate our district. To take any of that away would be detrimental to our district. We would have to make cuts in spending, in salaries, in maintenance. Our students don't deserve that. The issue at the heart of this debate is money. The plain and simple fact is, charter schools are private schools operating under the guise of a public school. The money they get is taken directly from the public schools in the area. These so-called failing schools can't afford to be drained of money. Presidential candidates like Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have recently raised it too. The bottom line is, it siphons off money from our public schools, which are already in enough trouble, Biden said, of some charters. A scenario posed in an article recently said to imagine that there are 10 schools in a district, each serving 100 students. A new charter school opens up in the district and takes 10 students from each school. Each district school now has less money to operate since the school receives money for each child enrolled, and each is serving just 90. That leads to budget crunch. Cutting some costs, like the number of teachers, may be relatively straightforward, though still often painful. Other costs, like the principal's salary and building maintenance, stay the same whether the school is serving 90 to 100 students. To allow a charter school to open would decrease the already strained funding our school receives. For the 2019-2020 school year, Cherokee County needed $67,610,588 for salaries for all of its employees. To cut funding would mean that we would potentially have to lay teachers off. We only received $22,237,941 from local taxes. To cut that money by any amount would be detrimental to our school district. There are issues with public education. That is undeniable. The United States ranks 35th in education among industrialized nations, especially when it comes to math and science. But taking away funding won't fix the innumerable problems that public education seems to face. The ways to fix these problems begin with rigorous training for our aspiring teachers and providing our current teachers with professional development that can be used in the classroom. We need to update technology and teaching strategies and encourage and motivate parents to be a part of our school communities. We need to take our funding and use it to make our schools better. That and that alone will make strides to improve public schools. That's why we can't allow charter schools to enter into our district. They pose a significant threat to our schools, and they don't have the data to support that they could do any better for our students than we are. Let's focus not on taking away from public schools. Let's focus on putting all we have into making them as great as they can be.